everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for today's episode. It's another good one, and I gotta tell you guys, you know from watching my channel that I've had several previous episodes that I did about removing the skirt from some of your favorite baits, whether it's a buzz bait or a spinner bait or a chatterbait. One of the best videos that I've done so far has been on the chatterbait. It was one of the best, most well-received videos that I did, and I talked about in that video how you can take your normal chatterbait, remove the skirt, or if the skirt falls off, to not throw the bait out. You can put on just a trailer and you will end up with a bait that, in my opinion, is potentially better than the actual chatterbait with the skirt. And the reason for that is when you just put on a plastic trailer like this is a Berkley jerk shad. When you put on, just say, this fluke style bait, what that's going to do is it's going to create a lot more erratic motion. You can make this bait dart side to side because you don't have the skirt creating as a, almost creating drag on the bait, right? So when you pull it, that skirt flares. What that does is that flaring motion prevents the bait from moving further side to side. So it's one of those things where, in some situations, specifically if you're talking clear water, summertime fishing, or if you're just fishing, you need to get your bait to dive a little deeper, removing that skirt can do you wonders. And I know recently, Johnny over at Fish the Moment talked briefly about throwing a tube on the back, and Randy talked about it, Randy Blockett in his video the other day. And that's what I want to talk about today, are some of my other favorite trailers to utilize in this scenario. So when you've removed the skirt from a chatterbait, what are some of the best other baits that you can put on? So in this case, I'm already holding here, this is a Berkley jerk shad fluke style bait. Works fantastic on a chatterbait once the skirt's been removed. It's a good trailer even with the skirt, but right here you get a great bait fish profile, and that long slender body will do a couple things. It moves far from side to side, and it also will allow you to get this bait deeper because you've got no tail motion, no kicking. It's a very streamlined bait, but it works really, really good if you're fishing around the shad spawn. And up here in the North Country, guys, if you're trying to get to some deeper fish that are relating to deep humps or deep points, and you're fishing smallmouth or areas where you've got alewife or you've got some Cisco, where we don't have shad up here, this is a great mimic of those bait fish because of the size profile and the larger size largemouth and smallmouth, as well as walleye and northern and muskie. That's their primary forage species. So throwing a jerk shad on the back like this is a great way to go about it. I've caught a ton of fish on it. My next, one of my next favorite baits to go to, if I'm still fishing shallow weed, but I've got some wood cover mixed in, that's when I like to go with a creature hog style bait. If you've got, like if you like to throw a beaver, whatever your creature style bait without big kickers, that's the key here. You want something that when it rides on that chatterbait, and I'll thread this on right here for you. So I'll thread this on so that the body is horizontal to the hook point, so perpendicular. So just like that, right? So the reason for this is if I'm trying to keep my bait higher up in the water column, I want a flat bottom. So when that bait's riding like this, it's going to do a couple of things. It's going to keep the bait higher, and if it hits a stump or even a thick clump of weeds, it's not going to want to bury in it. It's going to want to come up and over it because that wider body prevents the bait from burying in it, versus if you had on this jerk shad, there's not much there preventing it from really digging into the weeds. So if I'm fishing a typical chatterbait type area where I've got some good clumps of weed and I'm not fishing that deep, probably 5 foot of water or less, I really like to go with this creature hog or whatever your beaver style bait is. Again, the key here, guys, is you don't want big kicker claws. If you have those big kickers, when you pull it and try to create that erratic motion, those kickers create drag and the bait's not going to move much side to side. Now, I will say, if you're fishing muddy water, you might want those kickers, but in that case, I'm going to be throwing a skirt because I also want that bulk and any additional movement I can get in the water that will draw fish to my bait. Then I'm going to be using it. So I'd rather have a skirt in that situation. So most of these scenarios I'm talking about are generally better in what I would consider relatively clear water where you've got a couple foot of visibility or more. So don't think you can't throw a beaver on the back of your chatterbait. The last and probably the most well-kept secret over the last couple of years, guys, is the stupid tube, is to throw a tube on the back of your chatterbaits. There's a couple of things to it. One, you know, there's so many tentacles here that you just get a ton of motion, but again, you don't get any drag because it's so streamlined. There's no tentacles grabbing water. They're just moving back and forth. The other really nice thing about the tube is when you rig this, and I'll show you how to rig it, it stays on your chatterbait better than any other plastic. Most people, when they're fishing a chatterbait, are imparting a ton of action. You're ripping it through weeds, just popping it. You want to keep that bait moving. And with most other plastics, they will pull down the shank. And once they pull down the shank, you get into trouble. It's hard to keep them up. You can glue them into place, but it's just, that's the constant battle with doing this. The tube, the reason people love the tube is because it stays on so good. And there's an easy way to do it. I'm going to show you. You know, you can thread it on, but when you thread it on, what's gonna happen is you have a greater likelihood of potentially cutting the head of it. So what I do is I take my scissors and I'll go on about a 45-degree angle right through the side. So you'll see what I've done there is I've created just a little hole. But all that's gonna do is that's gonna create, because that's a clean cut, it's gonna allow me to thread my chatterbait on perfectly every time. So you'll see I get to the head, it'll just slide up and over that nice, and I've got a nice clean cut. Hopefully you guys can see it. You have a super good clean cut. That bait is not going anywhere. If you're throwing a tube that is slightly longer than the hook shank, like in this case, this is about perfect, you can take scissors and just put a tiny little slice right up the side, just so that the hook shank will sit in it. In this case, I didn't need to do it, but if you're throwing a smaller tube, you will have to do that at times. But it's super clean, super nice. The other tip with the tube that a lot of people aren't talking about, you can take a tube rattle and slide it up in here, and now you've added noise to your rattle, which is something you don't hear many people talking about. But I gotta tell you guys, up in the North Country, on areas like the Great Lakes and super clear water, there are a ton of big smallmouth bags being caught on this right now. We're not hearing people talk about it, but I can guarantee you that, like last year when we were at the St. Lawrence River and I took second in that tournament, I was catching some fish in practice on this. I did not end up doing it in the tournament, but in practice I did find a couple of my areas throwing a tube on a chatterbait without the skirt. There were other guys doing it too. It wasn't just me. I'm really surprised that it's been kept secret for so long, but it's starting to come out, so I just wanted to talk about it, tell you how I rig mine. But at the same time, guys, don't be afraid to experiment with other baits on a skirtless chatterbait. Really good way to go. I think you'll be surprised at how much better the bait actually runs because you have less drag and you'll generate a lot of bites. So guys, give it a whirl. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned for tomorrow's tips.